I'm Camille, 24 years old, and I own a successful business that helps students afford college. Ironic since my own father refused to pay for my education because I'd be competition for his golden child, my stepbrother. Despite being abandoned financially when I needed support, I worked my way through Stanford, built a company, and discovered my own strength. The betrayal hurt deeply, but it pushed me to create a life better than I ever imagined. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and subscribe to hear how I turned family rejection into success that helps others just like me. Growing up, I was always daddy's little girl. My father, Richard Thomas, was a successful lawyer with his own practice in Seattle. He worked long hours, but always made time for me reading bedtime stories, cheering at soccer games, and proudly displaying my academic achievements on his office walls. He had dreams of me following in his footsteps someday, joining his practice after law school. Everything changed when my parents divorced just after my 8th birthday. My mother, who had struggled with depression for years, decided she needed a fresh start. She moved across the country to Florida and maintained only sporadic contact through occasional phone calls and birthday cards. While the divorce was relatively amicable, her absence left a hole in my life that I tried to fill by becoming even closer to my father. For 2 years, it was just Dad and me in our big house. We developed routines: Sunday pancake breakfasts, movie nights, and weekend hiking trips. I became accustomed to being the center of his world. But when I turned 10, Dad started dating Diane, a marketing executive with a son my age named Jackson. "You'll love Jackson," Dad promised as we drove to meet them for the first time. "You two will be best friends in no time." Initially, Dad was right. Jackson and I got along well. We played video games together, rode bikes around the neighborhood, and even collaborated on a science project. I was happy to have a sibling after years as an only child. When Dad and Diane announced their engagement 6 months later, I was genuinely excited about our families merging. The shift happened gradually. After the wedding, Diane and Jackson moved into our home, bringing a new dynamic. Dad started spending more time with Jackson, teaching him to throw a football, taking him fishing activities that had once been ours alone. I told myself this was normal, that Dad was just trying to bond with his new stepson. Jackson and I were in the same grade at school, which inevitably led to comparisons. I had always been academically gifted, earning straight A's without much effort. Jackson, however, struggled in most subjects, despite hours of tutoring and help with homework. As our parents noticed the disparity, something subtle shifted in our household. "Jackson worked so hard on the C+ paper," Dad would say at dinner, proudly displaying a mediocre essay. Then, with barely a glance at my A+ project, he'd add, "Some people just naturally get good grades without trying." By middle school, the pattern was clear. Jackson's smallest achievements were celebrated lavishly, while my accomplishments were expected and often overlooked. When I won the regional spelling bee in 8th grade, Dad couldn't attend because Jackson had a soccer game where he mostly sat on the bench. When I came home with the trophy, Dad said, "That's nice, honey," before returning to helping Jackson with his math homework. Our family wasn't hurting financially. Dad's law practice was thriving, and Diane had a well-paying corporate position. We lived in an affluent neighborhood, took nice vacations, and never worried about money. Jackson and I both attended an expensive private school where we had every educational advantage available. As we entered high school, the academic gap between Jackson and me widened, despite the resources poured into helping him. Private tutors visited our home 3 times weekly. Dad hired specialized educational consultants. Jackson was given the latest technology test prep courses, and even a dedicated study space designed by an educational psychologist. Meanwhile, I continued excelling independently, developing my own study techniques and pursuing advanced coursework. By junior year, I was captain of the debate team, had perfect SAT scores, and won a prestigious science competition that took me to Washington, D.C. I had developed a passion for business and entrepreneurship after taking an elective course and spent hours reading about successful companies and innovative business models. "I think I want to study business in college," I told Dad one evening as he reviewed some case files. "Business? That's a change from law," he replied, not looking up from his papers. "I've been researching Stanford's program. It's one of the best in the country." This finally caught his attention. "Stanford? That's ambitious. My counselor says I have a good shot with my grades and activities. And there's that legacy scholarship I might qualify for since Grandpa was an alumnus. Dad nodded thoughtfully. Well, we'll see when the time comes. Still a year away. Meanwhile, Jackson had settled into a pattern of C's with occasional B's when Diane or Dad practically rewrote his assignments. He played video games more than he studied and had few extracurricular activities beyond a recreational soccer league. Yet somehow the narrative at home remained that Jackson was the hardworking underdog while I had it easy. Diane wasn't overtly unkind to me, but her preference for her biological son was evident in countless small ways, serving him larger portions at dinner, buying him new clothes, more frequently remembering his preferences while forgetting mine. Dad either didn't notice or chose not to address the imbalance. Despite the emotional challenges at home, I remained focused on my future. Stanford became my dream not just for its academic excellence, but increasingly as a ticket to independence from my family's dysfunctional dynamics. I researched everything about their business program, joined clubs and activities that would strengthen my application and maintain perfect grades while taking the most challenging courses available. Throughout junior year, I occasionally heard Dad and Diane discussing college plans. Of course, we'll cover tuition, Dad would say. That's always been the plan. I assumed this applied to both Jackson and me, especially given Dad's frequent comments over the years about saving for my education since the day I was born. What I didn't know then was how dramatically things would change during senior year, or that my father's favoritism would extend far beyond emotional support into decisions that would alter the course of my life forever. Senior year began with excitement and anticipation. College application season arrived, bringing with it both stress and hope for the future. I prepared applications for several universities, but focused most of my energy on Stanford. My guidance counselor, Mr. Phillips, was incredibly supportive, reviewing my essays and helping me highlight my achievements in the most compelling way. This is one of the strongest applications I've seen in 20 years of counseling, Mr. Phillips told me during one of our meetings. Stanford is highly competitive, but you have an excellent chance. In December, I received the email that changed everything. Early acceptance to Stanford's undergraduate business program, with a merit scholarship covering about 50% of the tuition. I was ecstatic, rushing home to share the news with my family. Dad seemed genuinely proud when I showed him the acceptance letter. He hugged me tightly, something that had become increasingly rare. That's my girl. I always knew you were something special. For a brief moment, I felt like I had my old dad back, the one who saw me, who celebrated my achievements. That feeling lasted approximately 48 hours. The shift began when Jackson received rejection letters from his first-choice schools. He had applied to several universities, including my father's alma mater, Washington State University. His applications had been last-minute efforts with minimal enthusiasm, but the rejections still hit him hard. It's not fair, Jackson complained at dinner. I worked just as hard as Camille. Dad patted his shoulder sympathetically. Different schools look for different things. There are still plenty of options. I tried to be supportive, suggesting some schools with later application deadlines that might be good fits for Jackson's interests and academic record. My suggestions were met with glares from both Jackson and Diane. As January progressed, I began working on financial aid applications. Stanford's partial scholarship was generous, but there would still be significant costs for tuition room, board books, and living expenses. Mr. Phillips had advised me to file the FAFSA as early as possible, which required tax information from my father. Dad, can we sit down this weekend to complete the FAFSA? I need your tax information to finish it, I asked one evening. This weekend isn't good. I've got a big case wrapping up, he replied without looking away from the television. I tried again the following week, and the week after that, each time receiving a different excuse. February arrived with the FAFSA still incomplete. During a follow-up meeting with Mr. Phillips, I expressed my concerns. Camille, you need to have a serious conversation with your father about the financial aspects of college, he advised. Stanford will be expecting your commitment soon, and you need to understand exactly what support you'll have. That evening, I found Dad alone in his home office and decided it was time for that serious conversation. Dad, we need to talk about college finances. Stanford needs my commitment, but I still don't know what I can afford. What exactly is the plan for my college fund? Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Well, things are a bit complicated right now. The economy has affected some investments. But you've always said you were saving for my education. You mentioned a dedicated college fund many times. He sighed deeply, removing his reading glasses. Camille, there have been some changes to those plans. Jackson's educational needs have been more substantial than anticipated. What does that mean? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. The private tutoring, the educational consultants, the specialized programs, they were expensive. Much of what I had set aside for your education went to giving Jackson the support he needed through high school. I felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. So my college fund went to Jackson's tutoring. What am I supposed to do about Stanford? There's still some money, Dad said defensively. Just not what we initially planned. Stanford is extremely expensive. Maybe you should consider state schools like Jackson is. They're perfectly adequate. But Stanford offered me a scholarship. It's my dream school, and you've always known that. Partial scholarship, he corrected. There's still a lot to cover. Look, we can probably manage some contribution, but you'll need loans for the rest. I was stunned. You spent my college fund on Jackson, even though you knew Stanford was my goal. How is that fair? Life isn't always fair, Camille. Jackson needed more help. You've always been self-sufficient. Before I could respond, the door opened and Jackson entered. Dad, can you help me with this application for Washington State? I'm stuck on the personal statement. Sure thing, buddy. Let me take a look. Dad turned to me. We'll finish this discussion later, Camille. But that discussion never happened. Instead, 2 weeks later, the family gathered for dinner when Diane announced she had exciting news. Jackson got his acceptance letter from Washington State today. She declared, beaming with pride. Dad's face lit up. That's fantastic. My alma mater, I always hoped one of my kids would follow in my footsteps. They have a pre-law track that sounds perfect for me, Jackson added, though he had never previously expressed interest in law. Just imagine, Dad said, raising his glass in a toast, Jackson Thomas, attorney at law, joining the family practice someday. Couldn't be prouder. The contrast to his reaction about Stanford was stark and painful. While I received a brief congratulations, Jackson's acceptance to a school with a 70% admission rate warranted a special dinner and champagne toast. After dinner, I confronted my father again about the financial situation. The conversation quickly escalated. I've worked hard my entire life for this opportunity, I argued. I earned that acceptance and scholarship. And Jackson has worked hard too in his own way, Dad countered. He deserves his chance without being overshadowed. How would my success overshadow him? We're not even pursuing the same field. Dad grew increasingly frustrated. You don't understand the dynamics at play. Jackson struggles with confidence. If you both went to good schools, you'd just be competition for him. He needs this win, Camille. The words hit me like a physical blow. So I should sacrifice my dream school because it might hurt Jackson's feelings. That's what you're saying? I'm saying we all make sacrifices for family. Your academic record means you can succeed anywhere. Jackson needs more structure and support. Washington State makes sense for both of you. Both of us, I got into Stanford. And how do you plan to pay for it? Dad challenged. Because I'll be honest, the family's financial support will be going primarily toward Jackson's education. He's the one who needs it. The unfairness of it all overwhelmed me. So that's it. You're choosing him over me. Dad's expression hardened. I'm being realistic about our family's resources and each of your needs. Take it or leave it. I left his office in tears, the full weight of betrayal crushing down on me. My father was not just choosing his stepson over me financially. He was actively preventing my success to protect Jackson's ego. The college fund that should have been mine had been diverted to prop up Jackson's academic performance, and now I was expected to give up my hard-earned opportunity to avoid making him look bad. For the first time, I saw clearly what had been happening for years. I wasn't just less favored, I was being deliberately held back to make room for the golden child. The revelation was devastating, but it also sparked something else: determination. If my father wouldn't support my dreams, I would find another way. The day after learning my father had essentially given away my college fund, I barely made it through my morning classes. During lunch, I hid in the bathroom, unable to face my friends while fighting back tears. By the time the final bell rang, I was emotionally exhausted, but still had debate team practice. I went through the motions, but as soon as practice ended, I broke down. Mrs. Bennett, my English teacher and debate coach, found me sitting alone in the classroom, tears streaming down my face. "Camille, what's going on?" She pulled up a chair beside me, her voice gentle. Everything came pouring out: the acceptance to Stanford, my father's redirection of my college fund to Jackson, the cruel statement about me being competition for my stepbrother. Mrs. Bennett listened intently, passing me tissues and nodding with understanding. When I finished, she didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. "What happened to you is tremendously unfair," she said firmly. "But I want you to know something important. This obstacle doesn't have to be the end of your Stanford dream." "How can it not be? I don't have the money." "There are other pathways to funding your education. It will be harder, certainly, but not impossible." She paused. "Have you met Ms. Rodriguez in the counseling office? She specializes in financial aid options for students in unusual circumstances." The next morning, I sat in Ms. Rodriguez's office, explaining my situation. Unlike Mr. Phillips, who focused on applications and academics, Ms. Rodriguez was an expert in the financial aspects of college attendance. "Unfortunately, your situation is not as uncommon as you might think," she told me. "When parents have the financial means but refuse to contribute, it creates challenges for financial aid. However, we can explore several options." Together, we researched additional scholarship opportunities, specifically for business students, women in business, and first-generation college attendees, since neither of my parents had completed college degrees. Ms. Rodriguez helped me craft compelling applications, emphasizing both my achievements and my financial challenges. We also explored part-time employment opportunities both on and off campus. "Stanford has a robust work-study program," she explained, "and the Palo Alto area offers many opportunities for part-time professional work that could complement your studies." The financial aid package Stanford offered covered about 20% of the remaining costs after my scholarship. But that still left a significant gap. I would need to take out some loans and work throughout my college years to make it happen. My best friend Zoe offered another piece of the puzzle. "My parents said you can stay with us during breaks," she told me after hearing about my situation. "They have the guest room, and Mom said it's ridiculous for you to pay for campus housing during summers if you're working in the area." This gesture of kindness from Zoe's family brought me to tears again, but these were tears of gratitude rather than despair. Slowly, a patchwork of support was forming around me. I reached out to my mother in Florida, hoping against hope that she might be able to contribute something. While she expressed sympathy for my situation, she explained that her own finances were precarious following a period of unemployment. "I wish I could help, sweetheart," she said. "I'm so proud of you for getting into Stanford. You always were brilliant." The conversation was disappointing, but not unexpected. My mother had never been reliable financially or emotionally. What did surprise me was a call from my Uncle Jim, my father's younger brother. Somehow he had heard about the situation. "Your dad and I don't always see eye to eye," Uncle Jim told me, "and I think what he's doing is wrong. I can't fund your entire education, but I'd like to help with books and expenses. It's not much, but it's something." His offer, $5,000 spread across 4 years, wouldn't solve everything, but it was meaningful both financially and emotionally. Someone from my father's side of the family believed in me enough to invest in my future. Meanwhile, tensions at home escalated. One afternoon, I overheard Diane and my father arguing about me. "Richard, you can't just abandon your daughter's education," Diane said, surprisingly taking my side. "I'm not abandoning anything," Dad responded defensively. "I'm being realistic about our resources. We both know that's not true. We could afford to help both kids if we wanted to. This isn't about money." Later that evening, Diane approached me while I was studying in my room. "I want you to know that I did try to talk to your father," she said awkwardly. "Thank you," I replied, genuinely surprised by her advocacy. She hesitated before continuing. "I should be honest, though. Part of me understands where he's coming from. Jackson has always been in your shadow. Everything comes so easily to you." "Nothing about this has been easy," I countered. "I know that now," she admitted. "But for years, I've watched Jackson struggle to compete with you. Maybe your father's approach isn't right, but his concern for Jackson's confidence isn't entirely misplaced. Her words revealed the complex family dynamic I'd been navigating without fully understanding. For years, my achievements had apparently been viewed not with pride, but with concern about how they affected Jackson. My success was seen as a threat rather than a cause for celebration. Jackson himself seemed conflicted about the situation. I caught him lingering outside my room one evening. "I didn't ask Dad to do this," he said when I noticed him. "Just so you know." "But you're not exactly telling him to stop, are you?" I responded. He shrugged uncomfortably. "It's complicated." "It's really not. He's paying for your college but not mine because he thinks I'd outshine you. How does that make you feel?" Jackson looked away. "I didn't create this situation." "No, but you're benefiting from it." "Have you ever once stood up for me when Dad compares us or dismisses my achievements?" His silence was answer enough. While Jackson might not have orchestrated the favoritism, he had accepted its benefits, without question, for years. As graduation approached, my father made one final attempt to sway my decision. "I've thought about it more," he said during a rare moment alone. "I'm willing to fully fund your education at Washington State alongside Jackson. You could commute from home, save on living expenses. It's a fair offer." "Fair would be honoring your promise to pay for my education at the school I earned my way into," I replied. "Stanford isn't the only good school, Camille. Being practical isn't the same as being unsupportive." "This isn't about practicality. It's about control and favoritism." Dad's expression hardened. "Then I guess you've made your choice. Don't come complaining to me when you're drowning in student debt for a fancy name on your diploma." His words cemented my determination. I would go to Stanford with or without his support. I finalized my financial aid paperwork, accepted additional loans, secured a campus job starting in summer, and made plans to stay with Zoe's family during breaks. Graduation day brought mixed emotions. While my classmates celebrated with their families, I maintained a careful distance from mine. My father and Diane made appropriate gestures for the occasion, gifts, photos, a dinner reservation, but the underlying tension was palpable. As I packed my belongings the following week, preparing for an early move to California for my summer job, I realized I was leaving behind not just my childhood home, but also my illusions about family. I was 18 years old, essentially on my own financially, and facing a challenging path ahead. Yet despite the heartache and betrayal, I felt something unexpected, a growing sense of freedom and self-reliance that would serve me better than any handout ever could. My first semester at Stanford tested me in ways I never anticipated. The academic rigor was intense, even for someone who had always excelled in school. While my classmates focused solely on their studies, I juggled a full course load with 20 hours of weekly work at the admissions office, a position that provided a modest tuition reduction along with an hourly wage. My housing situation reflected my financial constraints. While many freshmen lived in traditional dorms with one roommate, I shared a tiny two-bedroom apartment off campus with 3 other students from similar economic backgrounds. The cramped quarters and 30-minute bus ride to campus were worth it for the significant savings in housing costs. Those early months were a lesson in extreme time management and self-discipline. My typical day began at 5:30 in the morning with 2 hours of studying before classes. Between academic commitments, I worked afternoon shifts at the admissions office, then returned to the library until it closed. Weekends meant longer work shifts and marathon study sessions. There was little time for the social activities and campus events that formed a core part of most freshmen' college experience. The physical and mental toll was substantial. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and battled constant anxiety about maintaining my scholarship, which required a GPA above 3.5. Yet despite these challenges, I finished my first semester with a 3.8 GPA and a growing sense that I could actually make this work. The turning point came during my second semester, when I enrolled in Introduction to Entrepreneurship with Professor Thomas. Unlike my other professors, who seemed not to notice my perpetual exhaustion, Professor Thomas took an interest in my situation. "You have a natural aptitude for business thinking," he told me after I presented a case study analysis to the class. "But you seem stretched incredibly thin. What's your story, Camille?" Over coffee in his office, I shared the abbreviated version of my circumstances. Rather than offering sympathy, Professor Thomas offered perspective. What you're experiencing now, this crash course in financial management, time allocation, resource optimization, and perseverance is better business training than anything we teach in the classroom, he said. You're living the entrepreneurial experience before you ever start a company. His words shifted my thinking. I began to view my challenges not as obstacles, but as valuable learning experiences. Professor Thomas became my mentor, guiding my course selections and introducing me to opportunities I might otherwise have missed. One such opportunity was a highly competitive summer internship at a tech startup in Palo Alto. The position paid well enough that I could reduce my work hours during the academic year if I saved carefully. More importantly, it provided real-world business experience that complemented my studies perfectly. Throughout that first year, my contact with my father and his family was minimal. Occasional text messages and brief phone calls on holidays maintained the barest connection. These interactions were cordial but superficial, neither of us addressing the rift between us. Through these conversations and social media, I learned that Jackson was loving. Washington State had pledged a fraternity and was considering a major in political science as a pathway to law school. I also discovered through an inadvertent comment from my father that beyond covering Jackson's tuition, he was also paying for his apartment near campus and providing a generous monthly allowance for expenses. The contrast to my own situation was stark. By the middle of freshman year, the cumulative stress caught up with me. After receiving a B+ on a midterm exam, threatening my scholarship standing, I experienced what I can only describe as a breakdown. Alone in the apartment while my roommates were in class, I sobbed uncontrollably, questioning whether I could continue this punishing routine for 3 more years. It was my roommate Aisha who helped me through this crisis. Finding me in this state when she returned unexpectedly, she sat with me for hours listening as I finally voiced my deepest fears and resentments. You're trying to prove your worth by killing yourself with work, she observed gently. But you have nothing to prove to your father or anyone else, and you certainly won't prove anything if you burn out and drop out. Aisha, who was working through college independently after aging out of the foster care system, introduced me to a campus support group for students without traditional family support. Some were first-generation college students. Others had experienced family estrangement, and many were working multiple jobs while studying. For the first time, I found a community that truly understood my circumstances. Through this group, I met Daniel, a junior studying computer science, who was also putting himself through school independently. He became both a friend and a mentor, helping me navigate financial aid appeals and identify additional resources I hadn't known about. The system is complex by design, he explained. They don't make it easy to find all the support that's actually available. With Daniel's guidance, I successfully appealed for additional financial aid, based on my father's refusal to contribute despite his means. The adjustment wasn't enormous, but it reduced my loan burden slightly and validated my situation officially. As freshman year progressed, I formed close bonds with classmates in my business courses. What began as a study group evolved into a brainstorming team, with 4 of us regularly discussing business ideas and market opportunities. We complemented each other well. Maria had a talent for market analysis. Tyler excelled at financial modeling. Raj brought technical expertise. And I had a knack for identifying unmet customer needs. By sophomore year, my situation had improved noticeably. My summer internship led to a part-time position during the academic year, with more flexible hours and better pay than my admissions job. I received a small but prestigious scholarship based on my first-year performance. My GPA remained strong despite my work commitments. More importantly, I had developed an idea that increasingly consumed my thoughts: a platform connecting college students with affordable resources, from textbooks to housing to meal plans. The concept grew from my own experiences, navigating financial constraints in an environment designed for students with greater financial support. The market is every college student trying to manage limited resources. I explained to my business group one evening, what if we created something that makes it easier to find, share, and exchange everything from study materials to sublets? The group's enthusiasm confirmed my instinct that the idea had potential. Throughout sophomore year, we developed the concept further, researching competitors, conducting surveys, and building a basic prototype with Raj's coding skills. By the end of sophomore year, I had not only survived, but begun to thrive academically and professionally. The constant juggling of responsibilities had forced me to become incredibly efficient. My network of supportive friends and mentors continued to expand, and the business idea that had begun as a solution to my own problems was evolving into a viable venture. What had started as the most painful rejection of my life, my father's refusal to support my education, had inadvertently pushed me to develop skills, resilience, and relationships that were proving more valuable than any financial contribution could have been. The irony wasn't lost on me in trying to hold me back to protect Jackson's ego. My father had actually accelerated my growth in ways neither of us could have predicted. Junior year marked a turning point in both my academic journey and my entrepreneurial aspirations. The business concept I had been developing, initially called Campus Share, before evolving into Resource Connect, had progressed from idea to implementable model. With encouragement from Professor Thomas, I entered the university's annual entrepreneurship competition, where student ventures competed for seed funding and mentorship. The weeks leading up to the competition were intense. Between classes, work, and preparation, I averaged 4 hours of sleep nightly. My presentation required multiple revisions as I refined the business model and value proposition. My team, now officially my co-founders, contributed countless hours to market research and prototype development. Even if we don't win, the feedback from judges will be invaluable, I reminded everyone as we rehearsed our pitch for the 20th time. But we did win. Our platform, addressing a clear need with a scalable solution, impressed the judges enough to award us the top prize, $25,000 in seed funding and a summer of incubator support. The victory validated not just our business concept, but my entire approach to education and entrepreneurship. With the funding secured, we launched a pilot version of Resource Connect on Stanford's campus that spring. The platform allowed students to list and find affordable textbooks, sublease housing during study abroad periods, share meal plan points, and exchange other resources. We took a small commission on each transaction while keeping costs minimal for users. The response exceeded our expectations. Within weeks, nearly 30% of Stanford undergraduates had created accounts. By the end of the semester, we had facilitated thousands of transactions and generated modest but promising revenue. Based on this success, we expanded to 3 neighboring universities for the fall semester. Each new campus brought unique challenges and opportunities, requiring us to adapt our model while maintaining our core mission of making student life more affordable through resource sharing. My academic work continued alongside the growing business. In fact, many of my courses directly supported our venture's development. My marketing professor used Resource Connect as a case study for the class. My finance professor offered guidance on our revenue projections. The lines between education and entrepreneurship blurred productively. As the business gained momentum, it also attracted attention from investors. A presentation to the Stanford Alumni Entrepreneurs Network led to meetings with several angel investors interested in our concept. One particularly enthusiastic alumnus, a successful tech founder himself, offered not just capital, but mentorship that proved invaluable as we navigated growth challenges. My personal financial situation improved accordingly. The business wasn't yet paying salaries, but the connections it created led to consulting opportunities that paid well enough for me to reduce my other work hours. I moved from the crowded apartment to a still modest but more comfortable living arrangement closer to campus. For the first time since arriving at Stanford, I occasionally had time for social activities unrelated to work or study. Throughout this period of growth and success, I had maintained minimal contact with my father and his family. Our interactions remained superficial, neither of us acknowledging the hurt and resentment that lingered beneath the surface. From these limited exchanges and updates from extended family, I learned that Jackson had dropped his pre-law ambitions after struggling in his political science courses. This information didn't surprise me, given his lack of genuine interest in law, but I kept my thoughts to myself. What did surprise me was a text message from my father in late April of junior year. "Would like to see you when you're home next. Important to talk." After consultation with friends and considerable reflection, I agreed to meet during a brief visit home to collect some stored belongings. We arranged to have dinner at a neutral location, a restaurant downtown, rather than the family home. The dinner was awkward from the start. My father seemed older somehow, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. Diane appeared tense, while Jackson alternated between sullen silence and forced pleasantry. After uncomfortable small talk about Seattle weather and neighborhood changes, my father cleared his throat. Jackson has decided to take some time off from school to reassess his direction. Jackson stared at his plate. College isn't really working out right now. He's exploring other options, Diane added quickly. Maybe something in media or communications. The subtext was clear. Jackson had essentially dropped out after nearly 3 years of fully funded education. I nodded politely, careful to keep any trace of satisfaction from my expression. And how are things at Stanford? My father asked, an edge of defensiveness in his voice. I provided a measured update mentioning my academic standing and briefly describing Resource Connect without detailing its success. Something held me back from sharing too much. Perhaps a lingering fear that my achievements would still somehow be diminished or resented. As dinner progressed, the family dynamic became increasingly apparent. My father's disappointment in Jackson was palpable, despite his attempts to mask it. Jackson's resentment toward both my father's expectations and my success simmered just below the surface. Diane seemed caught between defending her son and acknowledging the reality of his choices. Near the end of the meal, my father made an unexpected overture. Your business idea sounds promising. If you need any financial support for it, I might be able to help now that Jackson's tuition isn't in the picture. The offer, coming after years of struggling alone, struck me as both ironic and somewhat offensive. Thank you, but we've secured adequate funding through investors who believe in our vision. Well, the offer stands, he replied stiffly. For that, or finishing your senior year, I know things have been challenging financially. I've managed, I said simply. I'll graduate without additional help. The conversation revealed something important. My father's firm, once thriving, was facing difficulties. Casual references to downsizing office space and changing market conditions suggested financial strain I hadn't been aware of. This context added a new dimension to our estrangement. Perhaps some of his financial decisions had been influenced by business pressures he hadn't disclosed. After dinner, Jackson surprised me by asking to speak privately before I left. Outside the restaurant, he lit a cigarette with shaking hands. I never wanted law school, he confessed. That was always Dad's thing, not mine. Why did you go along with it for so long? I asked. He exhaled smoke into the cool evening air. Easier than disappointing him. Easier than figuring out what I actually want. He paused. Must be nice always knowing your path. I didn't always know, I corrected him. I found my path by necessity when my original one was blocked. Jackson nodded slowly. I resented you for a long time. Still do sometimes. But I'm starting to think Dad did us both a disservice, me by pushing me where I didn't belong, you by cutting you off. This moment of honesty between us was unexpected, but somehow healing. We weren't suddenly close siblings, but there was a new understanding that the dysfunction in our family wasn't of our making. I returned to California with complicated emotions. Vindication mingled with sadness for my family's situation, lingering resentment alongside the first hints of compassion for their struggles. My father's belated offer of support felt hollow after years of independence, yet it represented an acknowledgement of sorts. Most importantly, I returned with renewed certainty that my path, though more difficult than it should have been, had led me to exactly where I needed to be. The challenges had forced me to build something uniquely mine, unencumbered by family expectations or obligations. As painful as the journey had been, I wouldn't trade my hard-won independence and accomplishments for an easier road. 2 years after graduation, Resource Connect had grown from a campus-based platform to a national service operating at over 50 universities. Our team expanded from the original 4 co-founders to 15 full-time employees working from a modest office in San Francisco's Soma district. We'd secured significant venture capital funding after demonstrating consistent growth and a clear path to profitability. The business model had evolved based on user feedback and market opportunities. Beyond facilitating peer-to-peer resource sharing, we now partnered with universities to provide institutional solutions for resource allocation and emergency assistance programs. This B2B component significantly boosted our revenue while furthering our mission of making education more affordable for students with financial constraints. My personal life had stabilized as well. After years of financial struggle, I could finally afford a comfortable apartment build savings and occasionally indulge in small luxuries like dining out or weekend trips. Daniel, who had become more than a mentor during our time at Stanford, was now my partner in life, as well as business serving as Resource Connect's CTO. Professional recognition came unexpectedly that spring when a prominent business magazine included me in their 30 Under 30 feature, highlighting young entrepreneurs making social impact. The article detailed Resource Connect's growth and mission, including a brief mention of my journey through college without family financial support. I hadn't anticipated the article's reach. Among those who read it, apparently, was my father. The call from reception caught me off guard. "There's a Richard Thomas here to see you. No appointment, says he's your father." I hadn't spoken to my father in months, and we certainly hadn't discussed any visit. For a moment, I considered refusing to see him, but curiosity won out. "Send him up." My father looked out of place in our startup office, with its open floor plan, casual dress code, and collaborative atmosphere. His suit was impeccably tailored as always, but his posture lacked the confidence I remembered from childhood. "Impressive operation," he commented, glancing around at the workstations where my team was engrossed in their tasks. "Your article didn't do it justice." I led him to a small conference room for privacy. "This is unexpected." "I should have called first," he acknowledged, "but I was afraid you might refuse to see me." There was a vulnerability in his admission that I wasn't prepared for. This man who had always projected absolute certainty now seemed hesitant, even nervous. "I'm in town for a legal conference," he explained. "But really, I came to see you, to talk properly face to face." I gestured for him to continue. "I made a mistake, Camille. Several mistakes, actually." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When you wanted to attend Stanford, I convinced myself I was being practical by refusing to help, that I was being fair to Jackson by not giving you advantages he couldn't match. But the truth is, I was wrong." The directness of his admission was surprising. My father rarely acknowledged errors in judgment. "Jackson never wanted law school," he continued. I pushed him toward my vision for his future without considering what he actually needed or wanted. And in the process, I failed you both. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Because I recently found myself on the other side of the situation. Diane and I separated 6 months ago." This was news to me. Our limited communication hadn't included personal updates. She said I was doing to Jackson what my father did to me, pushing him to fulfill my dreams rather than supporting his own. She was right. He sighed heavily. "It made me reflect on my parenting decisions, including how I treated you." As our conversation continued, my father revealed more about the family situation I had distanced myself from. The law firm had indeed faced financial challenges, though not severe enough to justify his decisions regarding my education. Jackson had struggled with depression after dropping out, finally seeking therapy that helped him identify his actual interests in graphic design, a field my father had never considered valuable. Diane had grown increasingly frustrated with my father's rigid expectations and controlling nature. "I thought I was protecting Jackson by ensuring he wouldn't have to compete with you," my father admitted. "Instead, I damaged his confidence by implying he couldn't succeed on his own merits. And I hurt you by withholding support you deserved." The acknowledgement I had longed for years earlier now produced complex emotions, validation, but also a weariness about old wounds. "What do you want from me, Dad?" I asked directly. "Not forgiveness necessarily, I haven't earned that yet." He hesitated. "Just a chance to know the extraordinary woman you've become, and maybe an opportunity to support you now, even though you no longer need my support." We talked for over 2 hours that day, more honestly than we had in years. I shared the real story of my college experience, the extreme financial stress, the exhausting work schedule, the moments of doubt and despair. He listened without defensiveness, occasionally wiping tears from his eyes. "I'm both heartbroken and incredibly proud," he said finally. "Heartbroken that I caused such unnecessary hardship, proud of how you overcame it." Before he left, I gave him a tour of our office, introducing him to my team and explaining the business in detail. His genuine interest and respect were evident in his questions and comments. As we said goodbye, he asked if we might establish regular communication, monthly calls perhaps. "I'd like to try," I said cautiously, "with appropriate boundaries." In the following months, we built a tentative new relationship based on mutual respect rather than expectation or obligation. Our calls became semi-regular, focusing mainly on professional updates and current events, rather than rehashing past hurts. It wasn't the close father-daughter relationship of my childhood, but it was something authentic that acknowledged our history while allowing for growth. Jackson and I also established cautious communication, beginning with occasional text messages and evolving to video calls every few months. He had enrolled in a design program at a community college and was discovering genuine passion and talent for his new field. Without the pressure of our father's expectations and the competitive dynamic that had characterized our teenage years, we found we actually enjoyed limited contact as adult siblings. Throughout this period of family reconciliation, I maintained firm boundaries. My success was my own, built without their support during critical years. I would allow them into my life now, but never again would I depend on them emotionally or financially. The painful lessons of the past had created a resilience and self-reliance I now considered my greatest strengths. Resource Connect continued to thrive, expanding our mission to include scholarship programs specifically designed for students whose parents had the means to support their education, but refused to do so, students like I had been. Each scholarship recipient received not just financial assistance, but mentorship from successful professionals who had navigated similar challenges. My journey had come full circle. The betrayal that once threatened to derail my future had instead become the foundation for helping others overcome similar obstacles. In the most unexpected way, my father's devastating choice had ultimately led to my greatest achievement. Not just personal success, but the creation of resources that would prevent others from facing the same painful choice between dreams and financial reality. On a crisp autumn morning, 5 years after graduating from Stanford, I found myself standing before an auditorium filled with educators, business leaders, and students. Resource Connect had grown into a nationally recognized platform serving over 200 universities, and I had been invited to deliver the keynote address at a conference on educational accessibility and innovation. As I shared our company's journey and mission, I couldn't help reflecting on the personal journey that had brought me to this moment. The painful rejection that once seemed like the end of my dreams had ultimately been the catalyst for building something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. After the conference, I made a special trip to my former high school to meet with Mrs. Bennett, the teacher whose support had been crucial during my most vulnerable moment. Though she had since retired, she agreed to meet me in her old classroom. "I always knew you would do remarkable things," she said, embracing me warmly. "But you've exceeded even my highest expectations." We spent hours catching up, and I shared the news that Resource Connect was establishing a teacher support program in her name, providing resources for educators who go above and beyond to support students facing personal and financial challenges. "Teachers like you change lives, Mrs. Bennett." "You certainly changed mine." Her eyes filled with tears. "We all face crossroads where we can choose bitterness or determination. You chose the harder but more rewarding path." That evening, I called my father. Our relationship had evolved into a respectful adult connection, different from the father-daughter dynamic of my childhood, but valuable in its own way. We spoke monthly, and he had become an unexpected advocate for Resource Connect, connecting us with legal resources and potential university partners. "I've been thinking about what you said last time we spoke," he began, "about how adversity reveals character rather than building it." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think my actions revealed your strength in ways neither of us could have anticipated." He paused. I'm still sorry for the pain I caused, but I'm in awe of what you've built because of it, not despite it." His acknowledgement felt like the closing of a circle that had begun with that devastating conversation about college funding years ago. My relationship with Jackson had also transformed. Free from our father's comparisons and expectations, we had developed a genuine sibling bond based on mutual respect and shared experiences of finding our true paths. He had established a successful graphic design business specializing in educational materials and occasionally collaborated with Resource Connect on user experience projects. During a recent dinner, he made an observation that resonated deeply. "We were set up to be rivals our entire childhood, but we ended up being each other's best teachers. I learned perseverance from you, and I think maybe you learned something about balance from my mistakes." He was right. Watching Jackson's journey through failed attempts to meet our father's expectations had reinforced my determination to follow my authentic interests regardless of external validation. And his eventual courage in pursuing his true passion had inspired my own efforts to create more space for personal fulfillment alongside professional ambition. The business continued to evolve in ways that reflected my personal philosophy about education and opportunity. Beyond the practical services connecting students with affordable resources, we had expanded into advocacy work partnering with organizations promoting financial aid reform and greater transparency in college funding. Our scholarship program for students with financially able but unwilling parents had grown substantially, now supporting 50 students annually across the country. Each recipient participated in mentorship and professional development activities, creating a community of resilient, determined individuals supporting each other through similar challenges. My own mentorship work became increasingly important as Resource Connect matured as a company. I regularly spoke with young entrepreneurs, especially women facing skepticism or resistance from traditional support systems. My message was always the same: external validation is valuable but not necessary. Determination and resourcefulness can overcome even the most painful rejections. Daniel and I had recently become engaged, planning a small wedding focused on celebrating the chosen family we had built around us. Our shared experiences of overcoming family difficulties had created a strong foundation of mutual understanding and respect. "What would you tell your 18-year-old self now? If you could," Daniel asked one evening as we discussed our journey. I thought carefully before responding. "I'd tell her that the rejection that feels like the end of the world is actually the beginning of something better. That the people who should support you but don't are making room for those who will. That your worth isn't determined by others' willingness to invest in you, but by your willingness to invest in yourself." This philosophy guided my approach to both business and personal relationships. I had learned to value people who showed up consistently, to create clear boundaries with those who didn't, and to recognize that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as painful rejections. The financial independence I had fought so hard for had given me something far more valuable than monetary security. It had given me the freedom to build relationships based on genuine connection, rather than obligation or dependence. My circle now included mentors, colleagues, friends, and chosen family who supported each other through authentic care, rather than expectation or guilt. Perhaps most importantly, I had developed a relationship with myself based on trust and respect. The young woman who once sobbed alone in a college apartment wondering if she could continue had become someone who knew without doubt that she could weather any storm. This didn't mean the journey had been easy or that the past hurts had completely healed. There were still moments when the memory of my father's words stung sharply, when the unfairness of having to work so much harder than my peers resurfaced. But these feelings no longer defined me or limited my capacity for joy and connection. As I look toward the future, I'm grateful for the unexpected path that brought me here. If my father had paid for Stanford as promised, I might have become a successful business person. But I wouldn't have built Resource Connect. I wouldn't have developed the deep empathy for financial struggle that informs our mission. I wouldn't have discovered my own capacity for resilience in the face of betrayal. Sometimes I think about that phrase that wounded me so deeply, "You'd be competition for him," and marvel at how thoroughly it missed the point. Real success isn't about competing with others or measuring yourself against someone else's achievements. It's about becoming the fullest version of yourself, contributing value to the world in ways only you can, and lifting others as you climb. If you're watching this and facing your own version of family betrayal or rejection, know that it doesn't define your worth or limit your potential. Your path may be harder, but the strength you develop along the way will serve you in ways you can't yet imagine. The people who should support you but don't are not the final authorities on your value or your future. You are. Have you ever had someone close to you try to hold you back from your dreams? Or have you found unexpected strength when faced with obstacles? Share your experiences in the comments below and let me know where you're watching from. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and hit that like button so others facing similar challenges might find it too. Remember, sometimes our greatest setbacks lead to our most meaningful successes. Thank you for being part of this journey with me.